Don't trust anyone. That's what I heard growing up, and maybe you did too. Maybe it was said directly, or maybe it was something you learned from watching people you loved get hurt. Either way, it sticks. It gets wired in, it becomes a rule, a shield. But here's what I want to tell you. What I know from 2 decades of research and 1,000 stories of heartbreak, betrayal, resilience, and healing. The problem isn't that we trust too much. The problem is that we don't understand what trust is. Trust isn't a grand gesture. It's not blind loyalty. It's not putting your heart in someone's hands and hoping they don't drop it. Trust is built brick by brick, moment by moment. It's a slow accumulation of small choices, the choice to listen, the choice to show up, the choice to keep a confidence, the choice to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. When people say, don't trust anyone, what they're often really saying is, I've been hurt. I've been let down. It's safer to expect the worst than to be surprised by it. And I get that. But let me tell you this. You cannot live a wholehearted life without trust. You cannot love deeply. You cannot lead bravely. You cannot create, connect, or belong without trust. And that starts with understanding that trust isn't something we give away. It's something we build together. So no, don't trust anyone until they've earned it. But also, don't shut the door on trust just because someone broke it. Because if we stop trusting altogether, we're not protecting ourselves. We're just cutting ourselves off from the very thing we crave most, connection. When we hear the phrase, don't trust anyone, it's often delivered like wisdom passed down through generations, weathered and worn, like an old leather suitcase handed to you with a look that says, you're going to need this. But underneath that tough exterior, under that message that masquerades as strength, there's almost always something softer hiding, something raw, something bruised. The truth is, that phrase rarely comes from a place of confidence. It comes from pain. It's the product of a wounded heart doing its best to survive. People don't come into the world not trusting. We're wired for connection. We're born needing each other. But life has a way of teaching us caution. Maybe it was a parent who didn't show up the way they promised they would. Maybe it was a friend who broke a confidence. Maybe it was a betrayal that shattered what once felt safe and sacred. And instead of processing that grief, instead of mourning what was lost, we reach for control. We build a wall, and we call it wisdom. We say, don't trust anyone, and we feel just a little bit safer behind that wall. Not happier, not freer, but safer. But let's name what's really happening here. When we adopt don't trust anyone as a life strategy, what we're doing is putting armor over vulnerability. We're trying to outsmart the ache. We're saying, if I expect the worst, I won't be disappointed. But what we're actually doing is robbing ourselves of what makes life meaningful. Relationships that matter, love that nourishes, connection that transforms. That armor we wear, it doesn't just keep the bad out, it keeps the good out too. It's easy to look at people who trust openly and assume they're naive, that they haven't been hurt yet. But in my experience, the people who trust with intention, not blindly, but courageously, are the ones who have done the hardest work. They've looked their wounds in the face. They've rebuilt after loss. They've chosen to lean in again, knowing full well what's at stake. That's not naivety, that's bravery. That's resilience in action. The don't trust anyone mindset isn't about being strong. It's about being scared. And we all get scared, every one of us. But living in that fear has a cost. When we default to mistrust, we end up alone in a crowded world. We end up performing closeness without ever really letting people in. We show up to conversations, to relationships with our guards up and our hearts tucked away in our back pockets, just in case. And when things don't feel fulfilling, we wonder why. So let me be clear. This isn't about trusting everyone. This isn't about throwing open your heart to every passerby. That's not vulnerability. That's self-abandonment. What I'm talking about is recognizing that when we refuse to trust anyone, we're not protecting ourselves. We're abandoning the possibility of intimacy. We're choosing numbness over risk. And in doing so, we're closing the door on joy, creativity, and belonging. Trust, when done right, isn't reckless. It's deliberate. It's earned, but it has to be allowed. When someone says, "Don't trust anyone," I hear a deeper story behind the words. I hear grief. I hear disappointment that hasn't been named. I hear a longing to feel safe without knowing how to ask for it. And I want to say, you're allowed to be cautious. You're allowed to take your time. But you also deserve connection. You deserve to live unarmored, to experience the kind of relationships that feel like exhale. That's not a fantasy. That's what trust makes possible. When we let it grow slowly, intentionally, from the ground up. Trust isn't a light switch. It's not something you either have or don't have, like flipping on a lamp and suddenly everything is bright and safe and clear. No, trust is far more complex. It's subtle, layered, and deeply human. The truth is, trust is not built in grand moments. It's not about sweeping gestures or big declarations. It's built in the small, quiet, often unnoticed decisions we make every single day. It grows in the in-between spaces, in how we listen, in how we keep our word, in how we respond when someone's struggling, in the way we show up when there's no spotlight and no applause. The idea that trust is either fully present or entirely absent sets us up for failure. It tricks us into thinking that one mistake, one misstep means all is lost. Or worse, it convinces us that if someone doesn't hand us trust immediately, they don't care or they're closed off. But trust doesn't work that way. It's incremental. It's earned, moment by moment, action by action, choice by choice. Every time you choose honesty over convenience, every time you honor someone's boundary, every time you circle back and make something right, you are building trust, brick by brick. What's powerful about this understanding is that it gives us clarity and accountability. If we believe trust is just something that happens or doesn't, then we don't take responsibility for how we contribute to it. But when we see trust as something built in the micro moments, we start to realize we have agency. We can't control whether someone trusts us immediately, and we shouldn't expect them to. But we can control whether our behavior is trustworthy. We can choose to be consistent. We can show up with integrity even when it's hard or inconvenient. In my research, I've learned that trust has multiple components. It's not just about telling the truth or being reliable, though those things matter. Trust is also about boundaries. Can I trust that you'll respect what I need, even when it's uncomfortable? Trust is about accountability. Can I count on you to own your mistakes and make amends? Trust is about generosity. Can I assume that you'll make the most compassionate interpretation of my actions, not the worst? These elements don't show up all at once. They reveal themselves through patterns over time, and those patterns matter. What we often miss is that trust isn't just about how other people treat us. It's about how we treat ourselves and how we treat others. If I constantly overpromise and underdeliver, if I avoid difficult conversations, if I gossip or break confidences, I'm not being trustworthy. And if I don't trust myself to hold a boundary, to speak up when something feels off, or to walk away when I need to, then I'm likely to put myself in situations where trust breaks down over and over again. Building trust externally requires doing the internal work too. Think about the people in your life you trust most deeply. It's probably not because of one big moment. It's likely because they've proven themselves in dozens of small ways over time. They called when they said they would. They remembered that thing you mentioned in passing. They followed through. They owned up. They stayed present. Those are the bricks. And even if you can't recall each one specifically, you feel the weight of them. You feel the foundation they've built under your relationship. And that feeling is safety. When we embrace the truth that trust is built in small, consistent actions, we shift the way we show up for ourselves, for others, and for the relationships that matter most. We stop demanding instant access and start looking for integrity. We stop putting pressure on others to just trust us and start becoming someone who earns that trust. And maybe most importantly, we stop seeing trust as a test to pass or fail and start honoring it as the sacred human process it really is. When people say they don't trust easily, what they're often really saying is, "I've been hurt." That phrase carries a kind of emotional armor, a layer of protection that signals past wounds and deep disappointment. The reluctance to trust isn't typically born from cynicism or bitterness. It's born from a very human place. Grief. Grief over what didn't work out, over people who didn't show up, over moments where vulnerability was met with silence, judgment, or even betrayal. These experiences create scars, and those scars speak. They say, "Be careful." They say, "Don't go there again." They say, "You're safer on your own." This is not a character flaw. It's not weakness. It's survival. When you've experienced the pain of broken trust, it makes sense to build emotional walls. It makes sense to question intentions, to analyze words, to anticipate disappointment before it lands. Our nervous system remembers pain even when our mind tells us to move on. That's not because we're stuck. It's because we're wired for self-protection. And when we don't have the tools or the support to process what happened, we turn that pain into policy. Never again. Don't trust anyone. Don't get too close. But the thing about pain is that if we don't tend to it, it doesn't just go away. It morphs into patterns. And those patterns start shaping our relationships. We become hypervigilant, always scanning for red flags, sometimes even seeing them where they don't exist. We anticipate betrayal before trust is ever given a chance. We sabotage intimacy because closeness starts to feel like danger. And all of this happens while we're still deeply craving connection, because the human need for belonging doesn't disappear just because we've been hurt. It just becomes harder to fulfill. One of the great misunderstandings about trust is the assumption that those who struggle with it are too damaged to change. But from what I've seen, that's not true. What's actually happening is that those who struggle with trust are often the ones who felt the deepest. They've invested, they've loved hard. They've shown up, and somewhere along the way, they learned that the cost of trusting was too high. So now they protect themselves. But that protection, it doesn't mean they're not capable of trust. It means they need space to heal, to learn new patterns, to find safety again, not just in others, but within themselves. When we talk about learning to trust again, we're not just talking about letting someone else in. We're talking about rebuilding our own sense of safety. Because trust doesn't begin with the other person. It begins with us. It begins with knowing we can survive disappointment, that we can set boundaries, that we can walk away if we need to, that we can advocate for ourselves, speak the truth, and take up space. When we trust ourselves to do those things, it becomes easier to take the risk of trusting others because we're no longer making them responsible for our safety. We're carrying that responsibility ourselves. The work of rebuilding trust is rarely linear. One moment you feel brave enough to open up, and the next moment you want to shut everything down. That's normal. Healing rarely looks like a straight line. It's more like a spiral. We revisit old wounds with new perspective. We test the waters, we pull back, we move forward again. And that dance isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that we're engaging with the process, that we're honoring both our longing for connection and our need for caution, that we're learning to listen to our instincts without letting fear call all the shots. So when someone struggles with trust, the question isn't, what's wrong with you? The question is, what happened to you? What were the moments that shaped this hesitation, this fear, this armor? And how can we together start writing a new story, one where trust isn't a leap off a cliff, but a bridge built step by step? One where trust isn't demanded, but earned. And one where the ability to trust again isn't seen as weakness, but as one of the bravest, most resilient choices we can make. There's a dangerous lie we sometimes believe that trust is all or nothing, that we're either open and vulnerable with everyone or closed off and guarded with everyone. But real trust doesn't live in those extremes. Trust is not about swinging between blind faith and cold suspicion. It's about discernment. It's about grounded awareness. It's about learning how to read people, how to honor your instincts, and how to slowly allow trust to be built rather than handed out or withheld like a punishment. And when we understand that, we stop confusing self-protection with wisdom. Blind trust is seductive. It feels good at first. It feels like relief. When someone comes into your life and says all the right things, when they show you the version of themselves they think you want to see, it's easy to think, yes, this is it. I'm safe here. But blind trust skips the step-by-step process of building a relationship. It moves too fast, too soon, and what often follows is disillusionment. Because no one can live up to the fantasy we create in our minds when we trust without boundaries. That trust wasn't based on real connection. It was based on a hope, an image, a projection. At the other end of the spectrum is no trust at all. The refusal to let anyone in. Anyone else's risk. The other end of the spectrum is no trust at all. The refusal to let anyone in. The chronic suspicion. The constant scanning for red flags, even when they aren't there. That kind of mistrust creates a prison. You don't feel betrayed because you never let yourself be close enough, but you don't feel loved either. You don't feel seen. You don't feel truly known. When we sit in that space long enough, the loneliness begins to erode our spirit. We start to question if closeness is even possible. And that isolation, that emotional shutdown, it can be just as damaging as betrayal. There's a space in the middle, though, a brave, messy, beautiful space where trust is earned, not assumed. This is the space of real connection. Here, we take the time to observe. We ask questions. We pay attention to the details, not just the words people say, but how they follow through, how they treat others, how they hold space for our truth. We don't just listen to their promises, we watch their patterns. This kind of trust doesn't form overnight. It requires patience, but it also creates relationships rooted in reality, not fantasy. When we live in extremes, when we either blindly trust or completely shut down, we miss out on the richness of human connection. We make decisions from fear, not wisdom. But when we learn to hold boundaries while still being open, we create space for something deeper. We allow people to show us who they are over time, and we allow ourselves to show up with integrity, not perform trust just to avoid conflict or loneliness. This is the kind of trust that has a spine. It's soft and strong at the same time. It's important to recognize that our culture often glorifies extremes. We love the all-in story or the all-out rejection. We love big gestures and dramatic endings, but trust is usually quieter than that. It's slower. It's built in the unglamorous, consistent, everyday choices we make. It's built when someone remembers something small you said and brings it up again. It's built when someone apologizes and actually changes their behavior. It's built when you see someone act with integrity, even when no one is watching. These aren't flashy moments, but they are the foundation of a relationship that lasts. So the work is not about choosing one extreme or the other. It's not about trusting everyone or trusting no one. It's about learning to live in the gray space, in the place where discernment, curiosity, and courage live. It's about letting people earn access to your heart instead of locking it away or handing it over too quickly. Because real trust is not reckless. Real trust is intentional. It's not a test people have to pass, but it's also not something we owe anyone without evidence. And when we learn to live in that space in between, we begin to cultivate the kind of relationships that don't just feel good, they feel true. One of the greatest misconceptions we carry is that trust is a gift we give to others, that it's about them earning their place in our lives. But trust in its truest form begins within. It starts with how we show up for ourselves. If I don't trust my own voice, if I don't believe in my own boundaries, if I'm constantly overriding my intuition just to keep the peace or avoid discomfort, then it doesn't matter how trustworthy someone else is, I won't feel safe because I've betrayed the first relationship I ever had, the one with myself. Self-trust is the foundation of all other trust. It's the ability to say, I know what I need, and honor that even when it's hard. It's the confidence to walk away when something doesn't feel right, even if no one else understands. It's the bravery to say no without explanation and the courage to say yes without apology. And it doesn't mean we always get it right, but it means we're willing to listen to ourselves, to make adjustments, and to learn. That inner relationship, when it's strong, becomes the compass we use to navigate the rest of the world. When we don't trust ourselves, we tend to look for someone else to anchor us. We over-rely on external validation. We seek constant reassurance. We ignore red flags because we doubt our judgment. Or we never let anyone in at all because we fear we won't survive if we're hurt again. Both ends of that spectrum, hyperdependence and hyperindependence, stem from the same root, a shaky sense of self. When our self-trust is compromised, our relationships become reactive rather than grounded. We're not connecting, we're clinging or avoiding. Rebuilding self-trust is a practice, not a destination. It's not about suddenly feeling confident or fearless. It's about choosing ourselves over and over again in small moments. It's waking up and asking, what do I need today? And then respecting the answer. It's paying attention to that gut feeling that whispers when something's off. It's holding space for our own truth, even when it's inconvenient. And maybe most of all, it's refusing to abandon ourselves for the sake of being accepted. Because every time we do that, we send ourselves a message. You're not worth protecting. That's the real trust rupture. One of the most powerful shifts we can make is recognizing that protecting our peace isn't selfish. It's sacred. When we are grounded in self-trust, we're not waiting for other people to tell us who we are or what we're worth. We're not outsourcing our safety. We're not handing over the keys to our well-being. We still crave connection. We always will, but we don't make connection conditional on abandoning ourselves. And that kind of clarity, that's where real power lives. It's not loud or controlling. It's steady. It's rooted. There's also grace in this process because self-trust doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean we never question ourselves or feel insecure. It means we don't shame ourselves for being human. It means we know how to come home to ourselves, especially when we mess up, especially when we fall into old patterns. The relationship we have with ourselves is not fixed. It's alive, it's evolving, and like all relationships, it needs repair sometimes. The way we speak to ourselves after we break a boundary or stay too long in the wrong place, that's where the real healing begins. At the heart of it, learning to trust yourself is one of the most liberating, transformative things you can do. Because once you do, you stop chasing people who can't love you well. You stop explaining your worth to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop shrinking to fit into places you've outgrown. You stop outsourcing your value, and you begin to attract relationships, friendships, and environments that align with your truth. Because self-trust is magnetic. It's not just a shield, it's a beacon. And it calls in the kind of connection that honors who you are, not who you pretend to be. There's a story many of us carry, one we rarely speak out loud, but that quietly runs beneath the surface of our lives. If I'm open, I'll be hurt. If I let people see me, really see me, they'll use it against me. Maybe they'll laugh, maybe they'll leave, maybe they'll twist my truth in ways I can't control. So we armor up. We put on the polished version of ourselves. We get really good at showing only the parts we think are acceptable, the parts that are strong, composed, together. But here's the hard truth. Armor keeps things out, but it also keeps us in. And when we can't let people see us, they can't really connect with us. The cost of protection is often isolation. We mistake invulnerability for strength, but vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is courage. Vulnerability is the risk of showing up without guarantees. It's saying, here I am, when you have no idea how that will be received. And in a world that teaches us to hustle for our worth, to hide our scars, to perform perfection, vulnerability becomes a radical act. When we're vulnerable, we're not being reckless. We're being real. And being real is the only path to connection that means anything. Anything else is just performance. It might earn you applause, but it won't earn you love. Now let's be clear, not everyone deserves your vulnerability. Vulnerability without boundaries isn't brave, it's self-betrayal. It's not about spilling your soul to every person you meet. It's about being discerning, about knowing who's earned the right to hear your story. We get to be selective about who we let into our innermost world. And that's not being guarded, that's being wise. Trust and vulnerability are dance partners. One step at a time, one shared truth at a time. You don't rip open your chest and hand your heart to someone who hasn't shown you they know how to hold it. The people who deserve your vulnerability are the ones who respond with empathy, not judgment. The ones who listen more than they talk, who don't rush to fix you or analyze you or turn your pain into a teaching moment. They hold space. They let your feelings breathe. They say, "Me too," or "That must have been hard," or simply, "I'm here." That kind of presence is rare, and it's everything. When you find it, it changes you, because it reminds you that being seen doesn't always end in rejection. Sometimes being seen ends in connection, in belonging, in love. But to get to that place, we have to risk being seen first. We have to go first. Vulnerability is almost always an invitation. It opens a door. And while not everyone will walk through it, the people who are meant for us will. They'll step through that door and meet us on the other side with their own vulnerability. Because when we share our truth, we give other people permission to do the same. We create a space where authenticity is not only allowed, it's safe. And that space, that's where the real stuff happens. That's where intimacy is born. There's something sacred about the people who choose to stay after we show them our unpolished selves. The ones who sit with us in the mess, not just celebrate us in the wins. Those relationships aren't built on convenience or image. They're built on truth, on shared humanity, on mutual trust, and they last. Because when the storm hits, and it always will, it's those connections that become our anchors, not the ones built on performance, but the ones built on presence, on vulnerability, on realness. So while it may feel safer to hide, to pretend, to manage how others perceive you, that safety is an illusion. It's a temporary comfort that comes at the expense of genuine connection. The people who are meant to love you truly love you. Can't find you if you're hiding. They can't connect with a mask. They can't hold a heart they're not allowed to see. Vulnerability may feel like the biggest risk, but more often than not, it's the only way home. Not just home to others, but home to yourself. Because when you stop abandoning your truth to fit someone else's comfort, that's when you start truly belonging to your own life, your own voice, your own worth. So here's the truth. Yes, vulnerability is a risk. Yes, trust is messy. And no, not everyone will handle your heart with care. But that doesn't mean you stop showing up. It means you learn to show up wiser. It means you let your boundaries be the gatekeepers, not your fear. It means you build trust from the inside out, anchored in your own truth and guided by your own integrity. Because when you trust yourself first, when you stand in your wholeness, you don't have to hand out blind trust to be connected. You invite in the people who are capable of meeting you there fully, honestly, human to human. And that kind of connection, that's not just rare, it's life-changing.